The night he knocked on my door, I thought it was just a visit. But when he said, "You can still call this home," I realized he wasn't just talking about a house, he was talking about us. It was late, later than anyone usually came by, when I heard the knock. A steady rhythm, firm, but not urgent. For a moment, I thought I might have imagined it. The world outside my apartment was quiet, the kind of silence that sits heavy in your chest, and I was used to being alone in it. But then it came again, softer this time, almost hesitant. I stood with my hand on the doorknob longer than I should have. It was strange, how something so simple, opening a door, could suddenly feel like the heaviest choice in the world. And then I heard his voice. Low, calm, familiar. The kind of voice that used to carry authority when I was younger, but tonight it carried something else. "You can still call this home." The words drifted through the thin barrier of wood like a memory I hadn't wanted to remember. My stepfather. When I finally opened the door, the hallway light framed him in a glow that made everything around us fade. He looked older, though not by much. Still in his mid-30s, but there was something in the set of his shoulders, in the tired crease around his eyes, that hadn't been there before. His hair was damp at the temples, whether from rain or nerves, I couldn't tell. We stood in silence for a long beat. His gaze searched me, as though trying to measure what time had changed in me. I felt suddenly self-conscious, my hair unkempt, the old shirt I'd thrown on for the night, the guarded way I held the door half-closed between us. "May I come in?" he asked, finally. The question was simple, but it carried weight. Permission. Respect. He wasn't barging in like some authority figure reclaiming lost ground. He was asking, gently, like a man who wasn't sure if he still had the right. I stepped back, the door opening wider, and he crossed the threshold. His presence filled the small space instantly, not in an overbearing way, but like warmth seeping into a cold room. He looked around, as if noting the life I had built without him, and then his eyes returned to me. "I didn't mean to show up unannounced," he said, voice softer now, "but I needed you to hear that. Whatever's happened, wherever you've been, you can still call this home." The word stayed with me, heavier than the silence that followed. Home. A word I hadn't let myself believe in for a long time. And standing there, with him close enough for me to notice the faint smell of rain on his jacket, I realized the night wasn't going to let me keep pretending I didn't miss it. The kitchen light buzzed faintly as I flicked the switch, a dull yellow glow spilling over the counters and catching in the steam that curled from the kettle I'd set on instinct. It wasn't much, just the way I always did things when someone stopped by, but with him standing there, leaning against the doorframe, it felt almost ceremonial. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he watched me move about the small space, eyes following the familiar rituals I'd carried with me since I left. The cupboards creaked when I reached for mugs, and I could feel his presence close behind me, though he hadn't stepped nearer. It was as if he didn't want to intrude but couldn't quite step back either. "Still take your coffee black?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. A quiet chuckle. "I do. You remember." I slid the mug toward him, our fingers brushing just for a second as he accepted it. The warmth of the ceramic passed between us, but it was more than the heat. I felt the deliberate slowness of his hand, the almost imperceptible hesitation, as if he wasn't sure if touch was still allowed. That single contact lingered in the air even after I pulled back. He finally sat down at the small kitchen table, the chair legs scraping softly against the floor. I joined him, the distance across the table suddenly feeling both too small and too vast. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence until he spoke again. "This kitchen, it looks the same as it used to. You always said it felt like the safest place in the house." His smile was faint, almost wistful. I glanced around. Maybe it did look the same, though I'd never noticed before. The clutter of mismatched utensils, the faint scent of coffee grounds, the ticking clock on the wall. It was ordinary, but somehow, in that moment, it carried the weight of belonging. I nodded. "Yeah. I guess it still does." He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table, his gaze steady but not pressing. That's what I wanted for you. Safety. A place where you didn't have to measure yourself against the world. The words sank deeper than I wanted to admit. My hand circled the rim of my mug, trying to steady the unease inside me. There was comfort here, yes, but there was also the ache of how much I had missed it, how much I had missed him. Our eyes met across the steam rising between us, and for a long moment, the kitchen light seemed to hold us in its quiet hum, like it knew something unspoken was slowly finding its way to the surface. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, its sound louder than usual in the pauses between our words. I sat across from him, my fingers drumming absently against the mug in front of me, and wondered if he noticed how unsettled I felt being here. This kitchen, this light, this man, it was all familiar, but I couldn't shake the sense that I didn't fit anymore. It was easier, almost safer, to let silence stretch. But silence also left room for memory. My mind kept pulling back images I thought I'd left behind, the way he used to sit at this very table, explaining things with patience no one else had ever given me, the quiet nights when he'd check in after a long day, asking if I was all right without demanding an answer. Back then, I hadn't realized how much those small gestures meant. Now they returned like shadows of something I'd lost, reminding me what it felt like to belong, and what it felt like not to. You look restless, he said gently, breaking the tension. His eyes weren't accusing. They were searching, like he wanted to understand the distance I was putting between us. I shrugged, a little sharper than I intended. Just feels strange. Like I don't really belong here anymore. He leaned back, considering my words. For a moment, I thought he might agree, that maybe he'd confirm what I already feared. But instead, he reached across the table, his hand finding my forearm with quiet steadiness. The touch wasn't heavy, just enough for me to feel the warmth of his skin against mine. You were never a guest, he said, voice low but sure. Not then. Not now. The conviction in his tone caught me off guard. I glanced down at his hand, the way his thumb rested lightly against my sleeve, and I felt something stir in me, confusion, gratitude, maybe even longing. I didn't pull away, though part of me wanted to. It was easier to keep walls up, to pretend I hadn't missed this closeness. But the truth was, I had. I cleared my throat, trying to disguise the heaviness in my chest. You make it sound simple. He smiled faintly, though his eyes carried something deeper. Sometimes it is. The ticking clock filled the room again, but it no longer felt like silence pressing down. It felt like space, space where his words could linger, where his hand could remain on mine without either of us needing to explain why it mattered so much. After the dishes were cleared and the conversation thinned into a kind of thoughtful quiet, I suggested some air. The walls felt too close, and I needed to move, to steady myself. He didn't hesitate. Just nodded, slipped his shoes back on, and followed me out into the night. The air outside was cool, heavy with the promise of rain. A thin mist had already settled across the street, softening the edges of everything, the street lamps, the pavement, even the houses lined up like watchful neighbors. By the time we reached the corner, the drizzle had begun, light enough to ignore if you wanted to, but steady enough that it would soon soak through. I hunched into myself, hands deep in my pockets. He noticed. Without a word, he shrugged off his jacket, the dark fabric whispering in the damp air, and draped it over my shoulders. The warmth startled me. His body heat still clung to the lining, seeping into me, and I couldn't help but breathe in the faint trace of him, the mix of rain and something familiar I remembered from years ago. I started to protest, but his hand came down briefly on my shoulder, steady, quiet, making it clear there was no argument to win. We walked like that for a while, steps in rhythm, the patter of rain filling the silence. There was no need for words, not yet. The world felt softer under the curtain of weather, like it had given us permission to say the things we'd held back inside. Finally, he broke the quiet. The house hasn't been the same without you. His voice was low, almost lost in the rain. Empty, in a way I didn't know how to fix. I kept my eyes on the sidewalk, the water glistening in the glow of the streetlight. His words struck something deep in me, though I wasn't ready to show it. I didn't think I mattered that much. He slowed, turning slightly toward me. You did. You do. The honesty in his tone stopped me cold. I felt the jacket heavier on my shoulders, not because of its weight, but because of what it meant, that he hadn't come here out of obligation, but because he needed me as much as I'd needed him, though neither of us had dared say it until now. I met his eyes in the drizzle, rain collecting in his hair, and for a moment, the world felt unbearably quiet. The only sound was the steady beat of water, and the truth we were circling around but not yet naming. The walk back was quieter than before. Neither of us rushed, though the rain had quickened. When we stepped inside again, the apartment felt warmer, almost too warm compared to the damp night outside. I slipped out of his jacket, folding it awkwardly over the back of the couch, though the faint trace of his scent still clung to me, making my chest tighten in ways I couldn't name. We sat down, close but not touching. The cushions dipped beneath us, the small shift pulling us a fraction nearer. I tried to focus on the rain streaking the window, the way the streetlights blurred against the glass, but I was too aware of him, his nearness, his breathing, the steady calm he always carried. I cleared my throat. Why now? Why come after all this time? The question slipped out more sharply than I intended. He didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked as though he'd been waiting for it. His fingers curled loosely against his knee, then stilled, as though he was grounding himself before speaking. Because I couldn't keep pretending, he said quietly. His voice carried something rawer than I'd ever heard from him. I told myself you'd come back when you were ready. I told myself I had no right to ask. But every night the house stayed silent. I realized it wasn't just the house I missed. It was you. My breath caught, but I forced myself to steady it. You mean, as family? The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was charged, heavy with everything he wasn't saying. When he finally met my eyes, his expression was steady but vulnerable in a way that shook me. Family, he repeated softly, almost to himself. Then his voice dropped lower. And maybe, more than that. The words hung between us like electricity, impossible to take back. My pulse quickened, the sound of it filling my ears louder than the rain. For a moment, neither of us moved. His confession hovered in the space where honesty meets danger, where one step could either shatter everything or bind it closer. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. My hands twisted together in my lap, but my body betrayed me by leaning ever so slightly toward him, as if pulled by some force I didn't fully understand. His gaze lingered on mine, unwavering, as though he'd already accepted whatever risk the words carried. And though I said nothing, the silence itself spoke, the kind of silence that doesn't deny, but quietly admits it feels the same. The silence stretched, heavier than any words we could have spoken. I felt the weight of his confession still hanging in the air, pressing down on me, filling the small space between us with something neither of us dared name outright. My chest rose and fell too quickly, betraying how unsettled I was, how much I wanted to run and stay at the same time. He didn't move closer right away. He just sat there, hands resting on his knees, shoulders squared as though he'd braced himself for rejection. The restraint in him was almost painful to watch, like he was holding himself back from reaching out, afraid it might scare me away. But then, with a quiet exhale, he shifted. Slowly, carefully, his hand slid across the couch cushion until it found mine. The first contact was light, tentative. His fingers brushed against my knuckles, and I swear I felt the warmth of him pulse straight through my skin. He didn't grip, didn't clutch, he only let his hand settle there, open, steady, offering rather than taking. I looked down at our hands, stunned by how much that small gesture said. His palm was rougher than I remembered, calloused in places, but there was a gentleness in the way he touched me, as if he was asking permission without words. My own hand twitched, instinct pulling me back, fear telling me this was too much, too complicated. But another part of me, quieter yet stronger, told me not to move. Told me to stay. And so I did. The quiet in the room shifted. No longer heavy, no longer suffocating, it thrummed with something alive, like the low hum of a wire carrying current. My pulse quickened, and I realized I was holding my breath. When I finally looked up, his eyes were already on me. Not demanding, not pleading, just waiting. Watching. The softness there undid me more than any bold advance could have. It wasn't hunger, it wasn't recklessness. It was care. "I don't want to push you," he murmured, his thumb brushing ever so slightly against the side of my hand. That single stroke of skin against skin made my breath falter. "But I needed you to know what's in my heart." I didn't trust myself to speak. Instead, I let my hand stay beneath his, let the weight and warmth of it ground me. And in that moment, it wasn't the words that mattered. It was the silence, the kind that admitted everything without saying a single thing. For a long time, neither of us moved. The clock ticked in the corner, the rain softened against the windows, and still his hand remained over mine, patient and steady. I realized then that this was the first time in years I'd felt no need to run, no urge to defend myself with distance or sharp words. His touch, simple as it was, had quieted something restless inside me. I swallowed hard, my voice low when it finally came. "Maybe. I want this to be home again." The words surprised me even as I said them. They weren't polished or thought through, but they were honest. Raw. I couldn't take them back even if I tried. And when his eyes met mine, I saw them land, saw the way his shoulders eased, as if he'd been carrying a weight I hadn't known existed. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he shifted closer, slow enough that I could have stopped him if I wanted to. I didn't. His arm slipped around my shoulders, tentative at first, then firmer when I leaned into it. My cheek brushed the side of his chest, and I felt the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the quiet rhythm of his heart beneath the fabric of his shirt. The embrace wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was grounding, like the kind of shelter you don't realize you've been seeking until you finally find it. His chin rested lightly against the top of my head, and I let my eyes close, allowing myself to sink into the warmth of him. "You've never stopped being home to me," he murmured, almost against my hair. The words vibrated through me, low and sure, and I felt something ease in my chest, something I hadn't been able to name for years. I let my arms circle his waist, tentative at first, then firmer as I gave in to the truth I'd been resisting. The steadiness of his body against mine, the simple warmth of being held, it felt like belonging. It felt like the answer to a question I'd been asking without realizing. We stayed like that, not speaking, not moving, letting the silence hold us. And in that silence, the meaning was clear: whatever this was becoming, however uncertain the future might be, here and now was enough. It wasn't just a house I could return to. It wasn't just a man who had once been my stepfather. It was him. And in his arms, I understood, this was still home.